So I call this is chapter 10, chapter 10.1. Okay. Now remember, we're focusing here on the beginning, and this is essentially, Jekyll's. This is Jekyll's story. Okay. So this will explain all the mystery. By the time we finish reading this, so there you go. There's no mystery left whatsoever. Okay. Here we go. So remember, this of course is, in case you're confused, this is Jekyll's voice. Okay, so notice again that it's first person. Okay, so it's telling us all of his opinions. I was born in the year 18, who knows, right? To a large fortune, endowed beside of excellent parts, inclined by nature to industry. So industry means that he's hard working, fond of the respect of the wise and good among my fellow men. And thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of an honourable and distinguished future. Okay, here's the first thing, right? He says, I'm born into privilege, right? I'm a privileged person. I have money. I have money. I've got a good. I think he means like I've got a good body, right? He's like I'm able. I'm not disabled, right? I have a fully working body, so I've got money. I'm in good health. I'm hardworking. I have good friends. I am guaranteed a good life, right? Guarantee of an honourable and distinguished future. Okay. And indeed, the worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition, such as has made the happiness of many, but such as I found it hard to reconcile with my imperious desire to carry my head high and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. So here's his problem, right? He says, the worst of my problems, my biggest fault, good morning. He says, my biggest fault is that I'm happy, right? He says, I have gaiety. Now, if you're somebody with gaiety, it means you're a happy person. And he says, I'm a happy person. But the problem is, of course, that you're not supposed to be happy, right? If you're a Victorian man, you're supposed to be serious. So he says, I found it hard to reconcile with my desire to carry my head high and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. So the idea, of course, is in public, men equals serious. So he goes, my biggest problem was that I really like life. I really enjoy life. I'm a happy person. But when I'm out in public, I have to have this like real stern, serious face. Hence it came about that I concealed my pleasures. Right? That a good repression quote for anybody? Right? I concealed my pleasures. And that when I reached years of reflection, so years of reflection is when he gets older, and began to look around me and take stock of my progress and position in the world, I stood already committed to a profound duplicity of life. So he says, when I got older, I looked around what I'd achieved. I realized that the man that everyone thought I was not the man I feel inside, right? So he says his success is fake, essentially, right? It's a fake. There's a fraudulence to his success. Now, this, of course, is Jekyll's central problem, that he doesn't feel like he can live his free, open, independent life because Victorian society says a man must be serious, a man can't have fun, a man must be industrious and work. So he says, I lived this duplicity of life. Many a man would have blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of, but from the high views that I set before me, I regarded and hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. So he said most people would just get on with it, right? Most people would just get on with it, live their two lives, but he feels shame. Whenever he does things that he actually likes, he feels ashamed by it. It was thus rather than the exacting nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation of my faults that made me what I was, and even a deeper trench than the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and evil, okay, good and ill, which divide and compound man's dual nature. So he says here that all men contain good and bad. But he says that him especially, because he was so bothered about how people thought of him, he says the trench was really big. Right? There's no middle ground here. But he said I was either being really good or really bad. And when I was bad, I felt shame at my badness. In this case, I was driven to reflect deeply and inveterately on the hard law of life, which lies at the root of religion and is one of the most plentiful springs of distress. Okay, this is interesting stuff, right? So he says that religion causes people distress. Though so profound a double dealer, I was in no sense a hypocrite. So this is about this life. Life is strict, really. Remember, the Victorian rules are built off religion and Christianity. Though both sides of me were dead earnest. Okay, I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I laboured in the eye of day at the furtherance of knowledge to the relief of sorrow and suffering. Now, remember, he's a doctor, right? So his job is to learn about the body to help people who are suffering. And what he says here is, he says, I wasn't a hypocrite, right? It's not as if I didn't like being a doctor. I like both. I like both being a doctor and helping people, but I also like this. Now, I'll tell you this, right? I've taught this book 8 times, 9 times. I don't know what he means by this. I don't know what he means by this, but my assumption is that he's doing things that society thinks are not okay. So my assumption is that probably potentially homosexuality, potentially drugs, right? He doesn't say. Why? Why would he not say? He's ashamed. Yes. What's he worried about? Right? What he's worried about here is his reputation. Even in death, right? So if he said here, let's imagine this, right? He says, I was knowing myself when I laid restraint and plunged into my homosexual relationship. People go, oh my God, Jekyll's gay. And that'd be his reputation destroyed. Okay, in those times. Please remember that, in those times, right? So he doesn't say it. He keeps it very vague. But he says that I was both these people. I liked being a doctor, but I also liked whatever else I liked. So I'm not a hypocrite. I wasn't pretending. I was 2 people. And it chanced that the direction of my scientific studies, which led wholly towards the mystic and the transcendental, reacted and shed a strong light on this consciousness of the perennial war among my members. So his 2 sides are at war. Good metaphor there. Cass, you got that? So the 2 sides of him are at war, right? Perennial means forever. They're forever battling. That's a battle, by the way. I've not been to war. With every day and from both sides of my intelligence, the moral and the intellectual, I thus drew steadily nearer to that truth, by whose partial discovery I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck. That man is not truly one, but truly 2. That's kind of your key quote from this whole chapter, really. Man is not truly one, but truly 2. Now, of course, here, this discovery is also a link to Darwin, that said we all contain the monkey within us, and to Freud, who argued that our brains, our psyches, remember Freud's theories of the psyche, that our brains are made up of competing elements. Okay, so Stevenson would know this, and he is referring to people's understanding of this, right? So when he says that, people go, oh, that's relevant. I've read Darwin. I know about the monkey part, but don't really understand it very well. I say 2 because the state of my own knowledge does not pass beyond that point. So he says that there are maybe more, right? He says man is definitely 2. Maybe it's 3. Maybe it's 4. Maybe it's 5. Others will follow. Others will outstrip me on the same lines. And I hazard the guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere polity of multifarious, incongruous, and independent denizens. Whoa, what a sentence that is, right? So polity means plural, so many. Multifarious means different. Incongruous means that they are that they don't fit, or they're different. Independent denizens. So denizen is someone that lives somewhere. So he says that the human brain has essentially competing personalities. He says eventually people will come along and they will improve on my research, and they'll discover that the human brain has all these different parts to it that are competing and fighting. Now, what's interesting is, for those of you who do science and know about the brain, that's true. If you look at the study of the brain, there are parts of our brains that have different jobs, and they compete and they fight. Yes, Charlie? It says competing personalities. I, for my part, from the nature of my life, advanced infallibly in one direction, and in one direction only. It was on the moral side and in my own person that I learned to recognize the thorough, this is important, and primitive duality of man. Now, of course, what he says is that one part of his brain is civilized, the doctor, one part of it is primitive, so the raw animal caveman. I saw that of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. Okay. And from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements. So his desire is to split himself in two. Okay. Now this is a bit where the book gets a bit confusing, because he wants to be two, like he says, in my body there are two parts of me, the doctor and the pleasure-seeking primitive man. I want to split them. I want to create two people out of one. I want to free them both through science. If each, I told myself, could be but housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust delivered from the aspirations might go his way, and remorse of his more upright twin, and the just could walk steadfastly and securely on his upward path, doing the good things in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of his extraneous evil. So he says that one part of him is evil, one part of him is just, right? The evil part won't be confined anymore by the just, I suppose, like judgment, and the just won't be annoyed by having the evil within him, right? There's evil and there's just. Just means justice and good. It was the curse of mankind that these incongruous faggots, it doesn't mean what it means today. It just means, the word in Victorian times just means a little people, right? Nowadays it's a homophobic slur, but it's not. That's an evolution of language. These incongruous faggots were thus bound together that in the agonized womb of consciousness, these polar twins should be continuously struggling. How then were they disassociated? Sorry. So he wants to split them up, right? He wants to split them up. He says they are together in an agonized womb of consciousness. Now, womb, of course, is where babies are born. So he wants to give, bear with me here, he wants to give metaphorical birth to his two sides, right? He wants to destroy himself and create two people, the good one and the bad one, right? The angel and the devil, and let them live their separate lives. No, he writes this, you'll see he writes this at the end of it, because he drops in things like this. So here he says, ultimately the discovery he makes dooms him to die. So that's a clue this is happening. So it's written after. So it's almost like a reflection. Exactly. When we get to the end of it, it ends with that sort of like, oh, they're coming to the door and it's all gone. Is this making sense so far? People often find this chapter difficult. I think it's quite straightforward, but people often find it hard, yeah? Well, this is the point, right? The point is that the ego, he is the ego. Like the human beings are the ego. So the point of being a person is that we all know that we all sit here right now, and we know that we all have desires, and we know that we have rules that we have to follow. And the job of a human being is to balance the two out. If you go too far one way, if you just go, oh, I'm just going to follow the rules all the time, your life is miserable. If you go, I'm just going to follow what I want to do all the time, then you can't live in society. So the very point of being a human being that Jekyll doesn't understand, and his big error, is that to be human is to live this way. The problem that he's got is that he lives in Victorian England. And Victorian England's attitude was, you can have no desires. So when he writes this, what Stevenson is criticizing is Victorian society. He says it's too strict. If Jekyll was if Victorian society said you can both be a doctor and also have fun, right? You can be gay, you can go out and have a drink, you can have fun. Jekyll's life would be easy. It's because society says to him these things are banned that he struggles. So the criticism, we'll add it here if you want to. So the criticism is about society, okay? And that society is too strict. Jekyll doesn't feel like he can be free, but also be a doctor. But the point is you make, Otto, is good, right? But to be a human being is to balance our sides. Jekyll doesn't want to do that. He wants to split them up. It was so far in my reflections when, as I have said, a side light began to shine upon the subject from the laboratory table. I began to perceive more deeply than it's ever yet been stated the trembling immateriality, the mist-like transience of this seemingly so solid body in which we walk attired. It says human bodies can be split, right? We think our bodies are strong, but we can easily manipulate them. Certain agents I found to have the power to shake and pluck back that fleshy vestment, even as a wind might toss the curtains of a pavilion. For two good reasons, I like this bit here. I will not enter deeply into this scientific branch of my confession. So he does not tell us. So he excludes the science, right? He says, I'm not going to tell you how I did it scientifically for two reasons. Number one, because I have been made to learn that the doom and burden of our life is bound forever on man's shoulders. So reason number one is that men are designed to live difficult lives, right? Men should not split themselves in two. And when the attempt is made to cast it off, but it returns upon us with more unfamiliar and more awful pressure, okay? So it returns with more awful pressure. So he says here that in reflection, it makes, so number one, it makes life worse. Second, because as my narrative will make, alas, too evident, my discoveries were incomplete. So he says, I'm not going to tell you the specific experiment or the medicine that I used to turn myself into Hyde, because number one, it's made my life bad. I wouldn't want to do it for everybody else. Number two, because it's incomplete. Number three, because it's fake, right? It's not real, right? So the real reason why Stevenson won't tell us, oh, you mix this and that and this, is because it isn't real. But people at the time were like, oh, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could experiment with that, right? They didn't know this wasn't a real story. They didn't know. So he says, oh yeah, these are the reasons why. But really, it's a bit of BS, because the reason why is because it's a fake book. Okay. Enough then. That I not only recognize my natural body for the mere aura and effulgence of certain of the powers that made my spirit, but managed to compound a drug by which these powers should be dethroned from their supremacy, and a second form and countenance substituted, none the less natural to me because they were the expression and bore the stamp of lower elements of my soul. Okay, we don't need that. Skip by, please. That's annoying. Don't like that at all. I hesitated long before I put this theory to the test of practice. I knew well that I risked death. Does yours have that blank page as well? I don't like that at all. I'm really hoping that isn't part of the book. I don't think it is. For any drug that so potently controlled and shook the very fortress of identity might by the least scruple of an overdose, or at the least inopportunity in the moment of exhibition, utterly blot out that immaterial tabernacle which I took it to change. So he says here, there's a risk of death, right? If you take a drug that's designed to split your personality in two, it could kill him. But notice that he does it anyway, right? There's a sense here that he's so desperate to split himself in two that he's willing to risk potential death. But the temptation of a discovery so singular and profound at last overcame the suggestion of alarm. I had long since prepared my tincture, which is the potion. I purchased at once from a firm of wholesale chemists a large quantity of a particular salt, which I knew from my experiments to be the last ingredient required. And late one accursed night, I compounded the elements, watched them boil and smoke together in the glass, and when the ebullition was subsided, with a strong glow of courage, drank the potion. Okay, so he makes the potion. Again, notice it's kind of weird, right? So ebullition, it boils, it smokes. It's supposed to be weird, and he drinks it. This is his description of becoming Hyde for the first time. Now remember, he thinks when he drinks this potion that when he wakes up, there'll be two people. He thinks that there'll be the good one and the bad one. Okay. The most racking pangs, which means pain, succeeded. A grinding in the bones, deadly nausea, and a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Then these agonies began swiftly to subside, and I came to myself as if out of a great sickness. There was something strange in my sensations, something indescribably new, and from its very novelty, incredibly sweet, right? It feels good, right? He's taken his drug, he feels good, right? It hurts, he's like, oh, and he's like, whoa, hold on, this feels good, right? Incredibly sweet. I felt younger. This is very important because at first he really likes being Hyde, and it's important that we don't see this in the book so much. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body. Within, I was conscious of a heady recklessness. Recklessness means to take risks. A current of disordered sensual images running like a mill race in my fancy. Sensual is like sexual. So he starts having sexual thoughts. There's lots of dirty sex thoughts are going through my mind like a zoetrope, right? Like a film reel in my head. A solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, 10 times more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil. And the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of these sensations, and in the act I was suddenly aware what I had lost in stature. So he realizes that he's become very short. Okay. So this, of course, is Hyde. Hyde for first time, right? Hyde for first time, and it feels really good, right? He feels really good. He's like, I felt lighter, younger, faster. I felt really evil, right? But I felt evil without the shame, right? So all of the rules of society he feels released from. He talks a lot about being a slave, right? But he says, I am now entirely free to do as I want, right? Imagine this, right? I'll give you a little bit of a thought experiment, right? Just to give you a little break from listening to me. Imagine this, right? I say to you this: tomorrow, you can do whatever you want, right? Anything you want, and the next day, nobody will So let's say this, right? Tomorrow you can do whatever you want, right? And then at the end of the day, it goes back to the start of the day and you can live life as normal, right? If you could do whatever you wanted with no consequence and nobody would remember you doing it, what would you do? Talk about it. What would you do? Complete freedom, right? Complete freedom. Nobody would know. Nobody would know, and here's the thing, right? Nobody would know, and nobody would even suffer because we just reset the day. Like a Groundhog Day situation where you live a day and reset. What would you do? I don't Right, let me just say this, right, which is, first of all, right, thank you. First of all, I genuinely do not want to know what some of you would do with that kind of power. But here's the point, right? Here's the point. The reason why, so whatever you just said is probably what your desire is, right? Now people would say things like, I don't know, you can do whatever you want. But the reason why you don't do it, the reason you do not do it is one, because number one is because society says you shouldn't do it. And of course, the point is that if you break the law, you might suffer from the legal system. But also, if you do things that are unpleasant or upset people, those people remember it and it could hurt your reputation. So the same kind of things apply. When he wakes up as Hyde, he feels like what I just said, that he can do whatever he wants and nobody will know, right? He then says, oh, wait a minute, I'm really sure. Okay. There was no mirror at that date in my room. That which stands beside me as I write was brought there later on, and for the very purpose of these transformations. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of day. So it's dawn. So he hasn't got a mirror. So he can't see what's happened to him. So he's going to go find a mirror, right? The inmates of my house were locked away in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I determined, flushed as I was with hope and triumph, to venture in my new shape, okay, to go out in his new body as far as to my bedroom. I crossed the yard, wherein the constellations looked down upon me. I could have thought with wonder the first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. So he says that he is something that is he's totally new, right? In a way, he's kind of playing God. He says, as I walked under the stars, I thought, these stars that have seen the universe in the history of time have never seen this before. So he's playing a kind of God character. I stole through the corridors, a stranger in my own house, to my room. I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. Now, one thing is interesting here, right, which is that I don't really understand where he gets the name from. He's like, oh, now I'm Edward Hyde. So he must have sat down and somebody must have gone, what should I call these people? Patrick Williamson? No, that's not good enough. Edward Hyde? Oh, somebody might make a stupid hide and seek joke. So I shouldn't go for that one, right? But at some point he's decided what he's going to call his new avatar. I must here speak by theory alone. I must here speak by theory alone, saying not which I know, but that which I suppose to be most probable. Okay, so theory, that which I know is supposed to be most probable. So he's having a guess, right? He doesn't really know what happened with the experiment, but he's going to guess what happened. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now transferred the stamping of efficacy, was less robust and less developed than the good which I had just deposed. So his evil side is less developed, okay? The reason is because most of the time, so in society, he's probably 95% good and he's probably 5% bad, right? So he says, my bad side is undeveloped, I have not been bad enough for it to grow into a big, powerful, adult bad person. Again, in the course of my life, which had been, after all, 9/10 a life of effort, virtue and control. Oh, sorry, I should fix that. So 90% good, 10% bad. So 90% a life of effort, virtue, and control. It had been much less exercised and much less exhausted. And hence, as I think, it came out that Edward Hyde was so much smaller, slighter, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Because if I have 2 lives within me, life 1, which I've spent 90% of my time doing, I'm on level 50, right? Level 50 of life 1, played it a lot, really good at it. Life 2, where I'm bad, I'm on level, what, 10? No, level 5, right? He hasn't played enough badness to grow up big enough yet. Even as good shone upon the countenance of the one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. Evil, notice he says the word evil a lot, right? Evil besides, which I must still believe to be the lethal side of man, had left on that body an imprint of deformity and decay. So this is evil makes our bodies deformed. And yet, when I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather of a leap of welcome. So he doesn't look at himself and think, oh, I'm really ugly. He thinks, ooh, I quite like it. Right? He likes the ugly, he likes the ugliness. This too was myself. It seemed natural and human. In my eyes, it bore a lively image of the spirit. It seemed more express and single than the imperfect and divided countenance I had been hitherto accustomed to call mine. So he likes it because it's pure. He looks at Hyde and he goes, that is a pure person. He's a bad person. He's an ugly person, but he is 100% him. Whereas when I'm Jekyll, I can see the difficulty in my face. And insofar, it was doubtless right. I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. So when he was Edward Hyde, everyone hates him. This, as I take it, was because this is important by the way, all human beings, as we meet them, are commingled out of good and evil. Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil. So when people meet Edward Hyde, they feel weird because he's not human. As we said before, this is the thing that makes you a human, right? We all contain good and bad, and our ability to control our badness or our evil, our ability to control our badness or our evil is what makes us human. Hyde, lacking that difficulty, is not a human being. And therefore, when people see him, they go, well, he looks like a person, but he's not a person. He's something different. I lingered but a moment at the mirror. The second and conclusive experiment had yet to be attempted. It remained to be seen if I had lost my identity beyond redemption and must flee before daylight from a house that was no longer mine, and hurry back to my cabinet. I once more prepared and drank the cup. So he says, okay, I was able to become Hyde, but can I change back? Yeah, can I change back? This is the second part. Okay, can change back? Question mark. Can I change back? I once more prepared and drank the cup. Once more suffered the pangs of dissolution, and came to myself once more with the character, the stature, and the face of Henry Jekyll. Okay, so he can turn back. And he goes, okay, here we go, right? That night I had come to the fatal crossroads. What do I do, right? I now know that I can change on a whim, evil person, good person, right? Can I live this way? Can I now live my life completely as two and alternate between the two? Had I approached my discovery in a more noble spirit, Had I risked the experiment while under the empire of generous or pious aspirations, all must have been otherwise. And from these agonies of death and birth, I had come forth an angel instead of a fiend. So he says, because when I took the potion, I was having dark, evil thoughts, I turned into the evil person. He said, if I was having good and generous thoughts as I took the potion, would I have become a good person, an angel? The drug had no discriminating action. It was neither diabolical nor divine. It but shook the doors of the prison house of my disposition. It describes life as like a prison. Sorry, yeah. Unlike the captives of Philippi, that which stood within ran forth. At the time my virtue slumbered, my evil, kept awake by ambition, was alert and swift to seize the occasion. And the thing that was projected was Edward Hyde. Hence, although I had two characters as well as two appearances, one was wholly evil, and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll, the incongruous compound of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. So he hates being Jekyll, right? The movement was thus wholly towards the worst. So here's his problem, right? He says, I really like being Hyde. It's really fun. I don't like being Jekyll. Why can't he just be Hyde all the time? This is his problem, right? So can he be Hyde all the time? Well, the answer is no, yeah, and we find out why, right? Even at that time, I had not yet conquered my aversion to the dryness of life of study. I would still be merrily disposed at times, and as my pleasures were, to say the least, undignified, and I was not well known and highly considered, but growing towards the elderly man, this incoherency of my life was daily growing more unwelcome. So he still likes his old life. It was on this side that my new power tempted me until I fell in slavery. Okay, so underline please, my new power tempted me until I fell into slavery. I had but to drink the cup, doff at once the body of the noted professor, and to assume, like a thick cloak, that of Edward Hyde. I smiled at the notion. It seemed to me that at the time to be humorous, funny, and I made my preparations with the most studious care. I took this. Okay, so he says here, right, at this bit here, that he can become Hyde anytime, right? And he loves it. It's like being a superhero, right? You can take the potion, turn to Hyde, go out and have fun, come home, take the potion again, turn back into Jekyll, and carry on with his life, right? He's freed himself from his problem. Now he starts to do the logistics. So this bit here is the logistics. Okay. So what does he do? Well, first of all, he gets a second house. I took and furnished that house in Soho, to which Hyde was tracked by the police. So he gets Hyde's house. Mm-hmm. And engaged as a housekeeper, a creature whom I well knew to be silent and unscrupulous. So he gets that evil landlady who he says she didn't give a crap about anything, right? She's unscrupulous means you've got no morals. On the other side, I announced to my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, was to have full liberty and power about my house in the square. So he gets Hyde his own house. He then says to the servants, okay, this guy's going to come around. You give him full freedom. He can go wherever he wants, do whatever he wants. And to parry mishaps, I even called and made myself a familiar object in my second character. So he deliberately went round as Hyde to get the servants used to Hyde being there.
What's the point of putting Hyde in your will?
well, that comes up because, of course, what happens is he starts to lose control, and then he's worried he's going to become Hyde forever, and he'll lose all of his money. I next drew up. Oh, here we go. It's right here, Cass. I next drew up that will to which you so much objected. So the will. Now this is where the story begins. Okay. So that if anything befell me in the person of Dr. Jekyll, I could enter onto that Edward Hyde without pecuniary loss. Pecuniary means money. So he makes the will, which means that if he has a problem, if he can't turn back, if Jekyll goes missing, remember the will says Jekyll's death or disappearance, the Hyde gets the money. So he's like, right, I can keep my fortune and just transfer it over to Hyde. And thus fortified, as I supposed, on every side, I began to profit by the strange immunities of my position. So he feels free, right? Now this, of course, is quite scheming, okay? This is Jekyll putting things in place to live a kind of dirty, duplicitous life. So he starts to enjoy it, yeah.
Why does he feel so when after some time, when he can you not switch back?
So we come on to that. Because, of course, the point is at the beginning, and this is the key for the beginning, right, which is at the beginning of the story, and these bits here, he goes, look, essentially, I live a dual life. I'm really unhappy being Jekyll. I did an experiment. I split myself in two, right? At this point here, Charlie? But these things come up, right? But add this, please. Add this. At this point here, right here, this point, he is at his happiest. Okay? He's at his happiest at this point. But here's the problem, right? Because we know, listen, Cass, we know that at the minute, Hyde is weak. He says it here, right? He says Hyde is weak. He's small and weak. The more time he spends with Hyde, he starts to level up, right? He goes up through the levels. Hyde gets stronger. Hyde doesn't give a crap about Jekyll, right? Because Hyde is evil. So he starts to get stronger. And what happens is that Hyde starts to take over. And then Hyde starts to do things that Jekyll doesn't think are okay. Okay, that's what we come on to. Men have before hired bravos to transact their crimes, whilst their own person and reputation sat under shelter. I was the first that ever did so for his pleasures. So he says, I'm the first person that ever had someone to do their pleasures for them. I was the first that could thus plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability, and in a moment, like a schoolboy, strip off those lendings and spring headlong into the sea of liberty. So 1 minute I could be in public being like, oh yes, nice to see you, sir, nice to meet you. Go home, drink a potion, turn into a schoolboy, right? Naughty schoolboys, right? You know what it's like. Do whatever they wanted. A sea of liberty, right? To swim in his freedom. But for me, in my impenetrable mantle, the safety was complete. Think of it. I did not even exist, right? Let me but escape into my laboratory door, give me but a second or two to mix and swallow the draught that had always standing ready, and whatever he had done, Edward Hyde would pass away like the stain of breath upon a mirror. Because whatever I do, I can just get rid of it, right? Like a mirror, I can just wash it away. And there in his stead, quietly at home, trimming the midnight lamp in his study, a man who could afford to laugh at suspicion would be Henry Jekyll. So he does bad things. I want to be quick, so we've got 5 minutes. He does bad things and he goes home and he's like, ha ha, right? I've got away with it. So he's like, I get to get away with it, right? I can do whatever I want, go home, drink the potion, and then I'm fine, right? At this point, he's really happy. He likes being Hyde. The pleasures which I have made haste to seek in my disguise were, as I have said, undignified. I would scarce use a harder term. Okay, so he says here that essentially they weren't too bad. They weren't too bad, right? Oh, I wasn't a murderer or a rapist, right? I just have fun. But in the hands of Edward Hyde, they soon began to turn towards the monstrous. Okay, so this is about his control over Hyde. When I would come back from these excursions, I was often plunged into a kind of wonder at my vicarious depravity. This familiar that I called out of my own soul and sent forth to do his good pleasure was a being inherently malign and villainous. His every act and thought centered on self. Okay, so he's selfish, drinking pleasure with bestial avidity. So he drinks pleasure like an animal from any degree of torture to another. Okay, so he likes to make other people's lives miserable. Torture's the word there. Relentless like a man of stone, right? So he cannot be stopped. Henry Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde, but the situation was apart from ordinary laws and insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone, that was guilty. Jekyll was no worse. He woke again to his good qualities, seemingly unimpaired. He would even make haste where it was possible to undo the evil done by Hyde, and thus his conscience slumbered. Hyde is starting to get stronger, right? And Jekyll's starting to get shocked by what Hyde's doing. When he wakes up in the morning, he remembers what Hyde's done. He goes out and he fixes it. He's like, oh, I'll fix the mistakes that Hyde makes. Into the details of the infamy at which I thus connived, for even now I can scarce grant that I committed it, I have no design on entering. So he won't say, right? He won't tell us the things that Hyde is doing, because again, he finds them very shocking. I mean but to point out the warnings and the successive steps of which my chastisement approached. I met with one accident which, as it brought on no consequence, I shall no more than mention. An act of cruelty to a child aroused against me the anger of a passer-by. What's he referring to here? This is chapter 1, right? He's talking about trampling the child, whom I recognized the other day in the person of your kinsman. The doctor and the child's family joined them. There were moments when I feared for my life, and at last, in order to pacify their too just resentment, Edward Hyde had to bring them to the door and pay them in a cheque drawn in the name of Dr. Henry Jekyll. But this danger was easily eliminated from the future by opening an account on another bank in the name of Edward Hyde himself. And when, by sloping my hand backward, I had supplied my double with a signature, I thought I sat beyond the reach of fate. So we have the child. Now notice, the child thing doesn't stop him. So he becomes Hyde. He really, really, really likes being Hyde, loves being Hyde. But at the end of this first part, we see that Hyde is